All right, welcome to another deep dive. We've got some really, really interesting stuff to dig into today.
Yeah, definitely some fascinating stuff.
It's all about a tech company, and they are making some big changes to their sales strategy, how they handle client relationships, the whole thing.
Yeah, it's like we got our hands on their secret playbook.
I know, right?
Right?
It's awesome. We've got all sorts of stuff. We've got recordings from a meeting originally in Japanese, so we had to have that translated, of course. We've got presentation slides and meeting notes.
Yeah, it really gives you a peek behind the curtain of how this company is trying to, well, I guess you could say kind of prepare for the future.
Yeah.
You know, like how they want to be more than just a company that sells you something. They want to become partners, real partners with their clients.
Exactly. And that's really clear right from the start when you look at this this document. It's called, and I'm just going to read this out, 250DHI.
Yeah.
P1.
What? JD1.
I know, right? It's a mouthful, but it's packed with information.
Yeah.
And it lays out their vision, like their grand vision for this whole thing.
Yeah.
And you know what they're calling themselves,
right?
What they want to be.
What's that?
A cutting-edge sales force.
Oh, wow.
Right? I mean, it's ambitious.
It is.
And they're putting a huge emphasis on being proactive.
Uh-huh.
You know, solutions-oriented. It's all about building those strong client relationships. It's not just about selling a product anymore.
No, and it's a big shift for sure. I mean, traditionally, sales has been very reactive. You know, you wait for the customer to come to you with a need, you fulfill that need, and then that's it. But this company, they're talking about getting involved much earlier, anticipating those needs, you know, really becoming like a trusted advisor to their clients. We're seeing this trend across the tech industry, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just about like, I don't know, tweaking their sales process here and there. It's deeper than that, right?
Yeah.
It's a fundamental shift in how they see themselves in the market. And there's this one phrase in the vision statement really jumped out at me. They talk about providing services. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
From upstream to maintenance.
Upstream to maintenance, huh?
So what does that even mean?
Well, I think what they're getting at is that they want to be involved in every stage of the process.
Okay.
So, you know, upstream that could mean like the early planning phases.
Right.
Even before a client knows exactly what they need, this company wants to be there helping them figure it out. And then maintenance, well, that implies ongoing support, you know, long after the sale is made.
So they want to be there for the long haul, not just a quick in and out.
Yeah, exactly. It's about building those long-term strategic partnerships.
It almost sounds like they want to be an extension of their client's own team.
Yeah, in a way.
Like embedded in their operations. That's pretty ambitious, don't you think?
It is ambitious, but, you know, maybe not entirely out of reach. What I find really interesting is the level of commitment they're expressing. This isn't just some marketing fluff. They're serious about making this happen.
Right. And if you're going to make a change like that, it's got to impact everything, right? The whole company culture. Think about it. This upstream to maintenance mindset, it's going to require a whole new skill set.
Right.
Like, what kind of training do you think their employees need to make this shift? Think about that, listeners. What would you need to learn to be successful in this kind of setup?
That's a great question. And you're right. It's not just about restructuring. It's about enabling your people to actually deliver on this new promise.
Exactly.
We'll dive into their training programs a bit later. But this shift in mindset is, well, it's really the foundation for everything else they're trying to achieve.
Okay, so we've got this big, ambitious vision. But how are they going to actually put it into practice? That's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, let's take a look at their org chart. They've got a whole new structure laid out, new teams, new roles. It's like a blueprint for this transformation they're talking about. And at the heart of it all is this role. It's called the CR, Client Representative.
Yeah, the CR, it's definitely key. And they've even broken it down into different levels. Like you got your SB1s, your SB2s. It's almost like a ranking system, you know, like in a video game. But seriously, what do you think that's about? Is it just a way to categorize salespeople, or is there something more to it?
I think it's more than just a ranking system. It could be a way to offer a clear career path within the CR role, you know, give people something to aspire to. Think about it. You start as an SB1, you learn the ropes, you gain experience, and then you can move up to SB2, SB3.
So it's like a built-in growth track.
Exactly. And that can be really motivating for employees, right? It gives them a sense of direction, a sense of progress. What do you think, listeners, would that kind of clear path appeal to you?
I think so. It's like you know where you stand and where you can go. Yeah. And there's another thing. The documents actually highlight certain people in these roles. They call them like shining examples of what a top CR should be. I'd love to know what makes these folks so good at what they do.
Yeah, me too. It makes you wonder, like, what sets them apart?
Right. Like, what are their secret skills and what kind of impact do they have on the rest of the team? Imagine being mentored by one of these top performers. What do you think you could learn?
Yeah, that's a great point. Having good role models, especially when you're in a company that's going through so much change, that can be really valuable. And you know what? Let's take a closer look at the skills and expectations for each of these CR levels. See if we can get a better sense of what it takes to really excel in this new environment they're building.
Okay, so we've got the vision, the new structure, this big emphasis on the CR role. But how are they actually going to make it all work in practice? Well, to get a better sense of that, we got to dive into the next piece of the puzzle. We've got that recording of their internal meeting. Remember, it's all in Japanese originally, so it's like we're eavesdropping on a key conversation right in the middle of their headquarters.
Yeah, and this is where we get a real behind-the-scenes look at how they're actually grappling with the complexities of putting this plan into action. It's one thing to have a vision, but it's another thing entirely to actually make it a reality.
Absolutely. And the first thing that jumps out from this meeting is clear they're really wrestling with how to define those different sales roles, the responsibilities, all the details. It's not as simple as just drawing boxes on an org chart, is it?
Nope, definitely not. And you can hear the tension, the debate as they try to figure it all out. It's clear everyone's on board with the overall vision, but the devil's in the details.
Yeah. And speaking of the devil, there's this one moment they're trying to come up with a name for one of the new sales teams.
Yeah.
And it just devolves into this awkward back and forth. I got to admit, I was chuckling when I heard this part because, I've been in those meetings where even the smallest things can turn into a huge discussion. Have you ever been in a situation like that, listeners, where you spend way too much time just trying to name something?
Oh, absolutely. It happens all the time. But what's funny is those moments of awkwardness, they actually highlight something really important.
What's that?
These discussions, even the ones that seem kind of silly, they're actually really crucial. Because if people aren't clear about their roles, their responsibilities, well, that can lead to all sorts of problems down the road.
It's all about clarity and alignment.
Exactly.
If everyone's on the same page, it makes everything run so much smoother.
And, it's like building a house. You need a strong foundation. You got to make sure those early details are right. Otherwise, the whole structure could become unstable.
Okay, so we've got the vision, the structure. We've even gotten a taste of those internal discussions, right? But there's another big piece to this whole puzzle that we need to explore, and that's how they're going to train their employees. How are they going to give them the skills and the knowledge they need to actually succeed in this brave new world they're creating? Let's move on to part 2, where we'll unpack their approach to training and development. So we've got this company. They're totally revamping their whole approach to sales and how they work with clients, becoming these proactive partners embedded in the whole process, right? From the early stages all the way through. And they've got a brand new structure to support all that. But how are they going to get their employees ready for this big shift? That's where their training program comes in.
Right. And they actually have a whole section in one of these documents outlining how they're going to approach training and development. And it's pretty interesting. They're using what's called the 70-20-10 model. Maybe you've heard of it.
The 2010. Yeah, I think that rings a bell. But remind me, it's not like discounts at the company store, is it?
No, not quite. The 70-20-10 model basically says that 70% of learning should come from on-the-job experience, 20% from interactions with other people, like mentoring or coaching, and then only 10% from formal training courses.
So it's not just about sitting in a classroom listening to lectures. It's about actually being out there in the field, learning by doing.
Exactly. And, I think that approach, it really makes sense given what this company is trying to do. Remember, they want to create this cutting-edge sales force that's all about building those strong client relationships. You can't really teach that kind of expertise from a textbook, Right.
It's got to be hands-on. Especially if you want people to be comfortable working upstream, like they keep saying. I imagine those client-facing situations, they can get pretty complex. You need experience to navigate all that.
Absolutely. And don't forget about that 20% that comes from interacting with others. Think about it. You've got those shining examples they were talking about, those top CRs. Imagine shadowing one of them, seeing how they do it, getting their advice. That's where that 20% can be really powerful.
Yeah, that kind of mentorship, it's invaluable. I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. It's not just about throwing people into the deep end. It's like they're building this structured learning environment where people can develop those skills little by little and get comfortable with this new way of working. What do you think about that, listeners? Does that kind of on-the-job learning resonate with you?
Now, there's another layer to their training program that we got to talk about, and that's the emphasis on metrics. They're very clear about the fact that individual performance is going to be tied to hitting specific targets.
Metrics, huh? Well, I get that. It can be motivating. It gives you something to aim for, a way to measure your progress. But I also wonder if it could create a lot of pressure, like a pressure cooker.
It's a good point. A metrics-driven approach can be very effective. You can drive performance, hold people accountable, but you have to be careful about how you use it, right? You don't want to create a culture where people are so focused on hitting those numbers that they lose sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah, you don't want people cutting corners or sacrificing quality just to hit a target. And what about the metrics themselves? What are they actually measuring? And how do they decide what those metrics should be?
That's a great question. And to be honest, the documents aren't totally clear on that. It sounds like some of the specific metrics are still being worked out.
So there's still some uncertainty there? Yeah. I guess that makes sense, like they're building this whole system from scratch. But it does raise an interesting question for our listeners. If you were working at this company, what kind of metrics would you want to be measured on? What would actually motivate you to do your best work?
Yeah, it's something to think about. Because in the end, whether this transformation succeeds or not, it's going to come down to whether they can align their training, their metrics, their vision in a way that actually helps people succeed.
So they've got this new training model. They're focusing on metrics to track progress, but there's still that element of, uncertainty. What's still missing from the picture? Let's move on to part 3 and see if we can find some answers. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about their vision for this whole thing, the new structure they're putting in place, that interesting training program, even those metrics they're going to be using. But there's one piece of source material we haven't really dug into yet, and I think it's one of the most fascinating.
You mean that recording of the meeting in Japanese?
Yep, that's the one. It's like we're flies on the wall listening in on a conversation between the people who are actually making this transformation happen.
It is pretty amazing. We get to hear their unfiltered thoughts, their concerns, what they're excited about. It's way more raw than those official documents and slides.
Okay, so let's dive into this recording. What were some of the things that stood out to you?
Well, honestly, the first thing I noticed was just how passionate these people are. You can hear it in their voices. They really believe in this vision of becoming a cutting-edge sales force that's totally focused on those client partnerships.
So it's not just some corporate buzzword to them.
No, not at all. It's something they're personally invested in making happen.
That's interesting. So even though we hear them debating, disagreeing on how to get there, they're all united by that shared goal.
Exactly. And I think that shared belief is what helps them get through all the, let's be honest, the headaches that come with making such a huge change.
Right. Remember that part where they were trying to come up with a name for one of those new sales teams?
Oh, yeah. That was classic.
I mean, it was kind of funny to listen to.
It was.
But it also shows how even seemingly small things can be a big deal when you're trying to create something totally new.
You're right. It's like they're trying to build this new structure, and sometimes it just doesn't fit neatly into those old boxes and categories.
And this recording lets us see that process unfold, warts and all. And I actually think that's what makes it so valuable. It reminds us that even the most well-planned transformations, they're still human endeavors.
Absolutely. And that human element, we often miss that when we're just looking at those polished presentations and plans.
Right. This recording reminds us that there are real people behind those strategies, people with their own motivations, their own questions, and even their own sense of humor.
And in the end, those are the things that make or break a transformation. It's not just about systems and processes. It's about changing mindsets and behaviors.
And to do that, you need everyone on board, everyone pulling in the same direction.
Exactly. And that takes more than just orders from the top. It takes open communication and a willingness to work together and learn as you go.
Well, I think we've done a pretty deep dive here. We've explored their vision, the structure, the training, those metrics they're using, and we even got to listen in on some of those key conversations.
Yeah, we've really peeled back the layers on this one.
We have. So as we wrap things up here, I want to leave you with one final thought. Something to consider as you continue to think about this company and, maybe even as you encounter similar transformations in your own work. This company is clearly trying to stay ahead of the curve. But what if that curve itself is changing? What if the very definition of what sales is, how you build those client relationships, what if all of that is shifting in ways we can't even fully grasp yet?
That's a great question.
How can companies stay agile? How can they stay adaptable in the face of all that uncertainty? It's something to keep in mind as we navigate this ever-changing world of business. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.